I recently started rewatching Batman the Animated Series. It's such a fantastic show, and it does a great job capturing the essence of Batman. It introduced new characters and fresh takes on older ones, and it got me thinking about the video games based on it. So I decided, why not take a look? So I tried every game I could get a hold of, and I'll go through them in the order I played them. First up, Batman Vengeance, released in 2001 for the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. I played it on the GameCube. This game is based on the last season of the animated series, where they changed up the art style, which for the most part I don't really like, especially on the Joker. But speaking of Joker, he's voiced by Mark Hamill here. In fact, most of the cast from the show return, and it's really amazing to see them reprise their roles, especially Kevin Conroy's iconic portrayal of the Batman. While the game tries to replicate the look of the show, I feel it somewhat misses the mark. There's something about it that comes off slightly cheap, and like they didn't quite have the budget or time to get it where they wanted to. This game released very early in the 6th generation console, so that probably adds to that. And that roughness also translates into the gameplay. I'm really not a fan of how you have to press the right trigger to switch to first person, but pressing the right trigger again does not take you out of that view. You have to press a Y button for that, and you have to slowly rotate through your items one by one, including your batarangs, which is a shame. I was hoping you could throw them out quickly like in the show. I feel like you can tell every time I have to grapple or throw an item, I struggle to do it, and it just shows in the gameplay. You use the second joystick or the C stick to look around. It's very sensitive, and the Y axis is inverted for some reason. The combat in general is just fine. It's not particularly satisfying, but it works. Well, at least the combat is fine when you're only fighting one person, but if there's more than two, you're still locked on to only one opponent, meaning that the other opponent is just free to punch you in the face. The game also has stealth mechanics, but I don't know what the point of them is since combat is really easy, and you are spotted very easily and there are no stealth attacks, so there's no point in doing it. You can handcuff enemies and it keeps them from getting back up. And they will get back up after like 20 seconds of being knocked down. I mean, you got knocked down by Batman. That seems kind of silly that you get up that quickly, but whatever. Usually you moved on by then, but it's kind of funny how fast they get up. So you just kind of platform about and fight goons with the occasional bosses and vehicle sections. Also, these driving sections are just horrible. If you get hit once by anything, it's basically over. You don't have full control of the vehicle, you just sort of steer left and right, and then you press the left and right triggers to do turns. There's nothing fun about it. I saw some people calling this game a hidden gem, but I would disagree with that. I had a hard time having any fun actually playing it. Really, it's just the voice acting I'm here for. The game looks rough, even for its time, and it feels like it too. Like these fire effects in the beginning, or these 2D trees, and these very low poly buildings. It comes off looking a little underwhelming. I also want to point out how the audio mixing isn't that great. The dialogue is just a little lower than it should be, and some of the music and sound effects are just too loud. I want to appreciate this game for trying to replicate the style of the show and to do something new, but I can't help but focus on its flaws because it's all in the gameplay. It feels stiff and unpolished, but it's playable. If it looks interesting to you, you might like it, because some people do, and that's great, but I really didn't. There's also a Game Boy Advance version. This game really doesn't do anything particularly well. The cutscenes are all stills from the console game CG cutscenes, and they really don't look good presented like this. This game is a really simple 2D platformer with some beat 'em up elements. Just move to the right and beat some people up. There's also this vehicle section, as well as a top-down view with Robin that's got kind of like a puzzle thing going on. It's nothing really that interesting. There was a sort of sequel to Vengeance called Batman Rise of Sin Tzu, and while Vengeance was a more slow and methodical game where you could at least explore a bit and had freedom to your movement, Rise of Sin Tzu is more like a very straightforward beat 'em up, and that's totally fine. It's got this top-down view, and the gameplay you're seeing right now is more or less the whole game. You can select between Batman, Nightwing, Robin, and Batgirl. You can play it alone or in 2-player mode. It has other villains that weren't in the previous game, and it's fun to see them represented again. But really, I don't have much to say about this game. It's a lot more simple, so I can understand why people don't like it as much. It's just kind of mediocre. And the boss fights are really long. I don't know. I don't know if it's just me. I feel like they go on for way too long. While I wasn't enjoying Vengeance a lot, at least that game tried to do something more interesting with Batman, or at least more unique. Rise of Sin Tzu is just bland. Rise of Sin Tzu also has a Game Boy Advance game, and much like Vengeance, it's another pretty standard 2D platformer. The game seems to use some sort of pre-rendered graphics for the sprites, and honestly I'm not really a huge fan of the way this game looks. There doesn't seem to be anything particularly interesting about this game. It seems like another standard GBA port. The kind of game that only exists because the publisher is like, hey, let's get more mileage out of this IP. Another game also based on the final season is Batman Chaos in Gotham for the Gameboy Color. It has these nice cutscenes that tell the story of the game. I always love seeing stuff like this on older systems. This game also has some really fluid animations, and a decent amount of attacks you can perform by holding the different directional buttons. This game is a pretty standard combat platformer, and it doesn't really do anything particularly special, but it does it fairly well. It's a very solid title. There are also flying sections that are kind of like a shoot 'em up, as well as the sections where you play as Batgirl on her bike. There's a lot of effort here, and the music is pretty good too. The boss fights are fairly varied, and I feel that they did a good job really pushing the hardware. It's not amazing, but it's solid, and if I had this as a kid, I'd be pretty happy about it. But that's enough of the games based off the new Batman Adventures, or the final season. I want to focus specifically on the first 3 seasons of the animated series from here on out, aka the good shit. First, we got Batman the Animated Series for the original Game Boy, which was released in 1993 and developed by Konami. It starts off with this really nice recreation of the show's opening. Then we get a cutscene of the Joker taunting Batman with his new plan. The game's pixel art is really nice. You can punch and jump, and if you look up, you can grapple and climb. There are also wall jumps in this game. I'm pleasantly surprised. Even though the game kicks my ass, I struggled with just the first level. I can at least appreciate it for what it is. It kinda reminds me of the Batman 89 NES game, but it's definitely more slow paced. I'd say this one's worth checking out, but if you're like me, you're gonna have a hard time with this game. Then we have a series of 4 games all with the same title, The Adventures of Batman and Robin, which all released in 94 and 95. Even though they share the same name and are all based on the animated series, they're very different games. First up, the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis version. The intro cutscene is stunning. The pixel art in this game is just wildly impressive, and they really did a fantastic job capturing the style of this series. The game is kind of a run and gun type experience, something similar to Sunset Riders, where you repeatedly throw batarangs. You can get upgrades to throw more or get elemental effects on them, and whenever enemies are nearby you punch or kick instead of throwing the batarangs. It's fast paced, hectic, it's got good music and plenty of villains to beat up. You can play as either Batman or Robin or both in the 2-player mode. The animations are smooth and fluid, the 3D effects on the first stage are wicked cool looking. There are rotating sprites and all kinds of impressive effects, really showing off what the Genesis can do. There are also top-down sections and a glider in these jetpack sections, but honestly these are not interesting to me and kind of killed the pace of the game as a whole a little bit. The soundtrack for this game is actually made by Jesper Kyd, who you might know from the Assassin's Creed series. This game is tough, and I mean ridiculously tough. Even though you have 6 continues, you're probably going to burn through them really fucking fast. Every boss really is an endurance test. If you're going to play this, I would highly recommend that you try to beat every stage with full lives of continues. So every time you've beaten a stage, you basically just reset the game and then use the level select code to go to the next stage. Otherwise, you're going to have a really hard time. Of course, if you like insane challenges, then hey, go for it. But I think the level of challenge is honestly a bit unreasonable. The only way I'd get footage of the later stages of this game is to cheat. I could not get through it normally. I can also imagine this game being great to play with friends. It's really hard, but it's pretty good. It's a challenge that's worth a try. I also think it's neat that Mr. Freeze is the main villain here. The animated series version of this character is absolutely my favorite. If this game seems fun to you, give it a try. It's pretty good. Then we have the Sega CD game. This version has animated cutscenes made just for it, so many consider it to be a sort of lost episode of the show. It has the same voice cast and all. It's seriously cool. Now, I was expecting the gameplay to be like an upgraded version of the Genesis game, with the same style of gameplay and maybe with some cool bonus stages where you play as the Batmobile, and look, here it is. It looks really cool, right? Well, this is the whole game. You only drive vehicles in this one. No playing as Batman himself. It's a huge bummer, considering how good the Genesis game was. I mean, the perspective is cool, but it's not enough to carry a whole game. This game is way too difficult. For the most part, the gameplay is just about avoiding obstacles, and every now and then you have enemies to shoot at that take way too much damage. While I think the visuals are really cool, and the cutscenes are a great reward, it's kind of just mediocre. I didn't really care too much for it. Actually, it turns out they would try this concept once more on the PS1 with Batman Gotham City Racer. This game is also based off the final season, but I didn't find out about this game until I was almost done with the video, so I'm throwing it in here. The title makes it sound like a kart racer, but it really isn't. While it's cool to see them once again having animated cutscenes, just like the Sega CD game, actually playing the game to view the cutscenes isn't really worth it. That and the cutscenes for this game are just taken from the show, so you're better off actually watching the last season than suffering through this game. The controls are really weird, and the Batmobile feels incredibly slippery and lightweight. It also just does not feel polished at all. In just a short time I played, I saw a few glitches, like Two-Face's car yeeting another car. There's a few mission types you either get to a specific point in time, which often means having to drive into these tunnels that give you a loading screen that just kills the pace of the missions. There are also tailing missions where you have no concept of how far away you have to be from your enemy. Basically just don't drive directly next to them and somehow they don't notice you. Or there are combat missions where you drive after them and try to shoot them down before they get you. Honestly, I don't feel like I need to say much about how bad this game feels to play. I think you get the idea just by looking at it. Just don't bother, it's not worth it. If you want a Batman game with combat driving sections, play Batman Returns on the Sega CD. That game has better driving sections than these two games combined. The Sega Game Gear also had a Batman and Robin game, though you can only play as Batman here, as the plot revolves around the Joker kidnapping Robin. It's a very standard side-scrolling platformer with some simple combat. You can throw batarangs or switch out to other weapons, and like in the Genesis game, you punch instead of throw when you're close to someone. The art is pretty nice in this game too. It feels okay to play, but I honestly prefer the Game Boy title. It seemed a little more unique, and I wish this game had a wall jump. But either way, this game is okay. And last but not least, The Adventures of Batman and Robin for the Super Nintendo was a visual masterpiece. The characters look perfect. The way everything is shaded looks wonderful. The animations are just so good. Moving Batman feels great. You can wall jump, you can roll to dodge certain attacks. You can also grab onto ledges and have intense situations like this right here where I almost got crushed. There's a couple of different attacks you can do. You can punch, you can duck and kick, you can jump and kick. You can grab your enemies, and you can throw different types of weapons to stun them or disarm them. You can also block, and what really surprised me was the grapple hook. You could shoot it diagonally or straight up. Not only can you pull yourself to the spot you're grappled to, you can even swing and use it to avoid obstacles, and it feels really satisfying to use. I love seeing stuff like this on older systems. There's impressive and fun boss fights that really get creative with how to fight them. Like the first mini-boss where you gotta climb onto his gun and punch him in the face. Then you move on to the roller coaster where Harley sends off the Joker and they have this fun little interaction. Then Batman gets on and the whole boss fight takes place on the coaster, which is a reference to the episode Be a Clown from the show. This is some seriously cool stuff, and the SNES sound chip does a lot of work here. Not only is the soundtrack for the game fantastic, featuring tracks from the show that sound great, but small stuff like the Joker laughing and the roller coaster making mechanical noises as it moves. Oh, and also the original tracks from the game also sound great and really fit in perfectly with the show. The game just looks and sounds phenomenal, and it's wonderful to see all the dialogue between and during the stages. It really gives you the feeling that you're playing through your own episodes of the show, even down to how every stage has its own title card and artwork, stuff that we would later see in games like Batman Vengeance. It's such a good way to split the different sections of the game by making each of them feel like their own episode of the show. Another trend we would see in later Batman games are the game over quotes, where the villains will taunt you whenever you die. It's just like what they would do later in the Batman Arkham games, and it's such a fun idea. You can not only change the difficulty to be either easy, normal, or hard, which changes how many extra lives you have and whether or not you can use the password system, but you can also change some of the controls if you want, which is a pretty cool thing to see on such an old game. One thing I also love is that the backgrounds change a lot. In the Genesis game, each stage mostly just has the same background, and they use some really cool looking effects on some of them, but it wasn't that interesting, especially Two-Face's level just being one big elevator. The first stage on the Super Nintendo goes from city streets to back alleys to funhouse to roller coaster. There's so much going on, and it really gives you the feeling of actually progressing and getting somewhere. Also, about that roller coaster, not only do we get some cool sprite rotation, but some nice 3D effects too. This game does not hold back, it goes hard. And the movement on the ground and the Poison Ivy stage is so impressive, and the way the plants go down as you step onto them, and the trees start falling over and you gotta jump off them and grapple to safety. I also love how this game changes things up a lot. Penguin's stage is about freeing hostages around the building with Robin, and you get hints as to where they are and how to find them. Then the lights turn off again and Robin has been tied up and you save him and find the last hostages, get the code to head to the roof and finish the Penguin. The next stage is basically one big chase scene. You start off scaling a building and you see Catwoman climbing and swinging in the background. Eventually you catch up to her and have a short fight. She runs off and you continue chasing her across rooftops and down buildings, and of course it ends with one big epic fight in an alleyway. The next stage really surprised me. Two-Face is on the run and you gotta drive after him. At first I really wasn't enjoying this section because I had a hard time making sharp turns, but once I started slowing down a bit before the turns and using the L and R buttons to drift, I was really starting to enjoy it. It was kind of addicting to make those sharp turns as good as I could. Then it turns into a combat section where you fight off enemy vehicles and catch up to Two-Face and take him down. This part's fine, it's just that it hurt my thumb a bit. I wish I could hold down the button to continue shooting, but it's still a decent boss. And then we have Scarecrow's stage where civilians have been hit with a fear gas and try to attack Batman, so you gotta avoid them because you can't hurt innocent civilians, and they'll grab you and give Scarecrow's goons a chance to hit you. Again, they just keep changing things up and I'm impressed. The Riddler stage is probably the one I like the least. It's a big maze and you gotta use X-ray goggles to see hidden paths. There are question mark spots that will teleport you. Some of them you have to jump over because they'll teleport you somewhere you don't want to be, but figuring that out is kind of just trial and error. It has some neat effects going on, but it drags on a bit, especially since I got a game over during the second area and using a continue still sends me back to the start of the maze. If you play on easy mode you get 5 lives, which is super doable, but it's still a challenge the first time around. Thankfully you can use a password system to get back to the same stage or just skip it if you want to. Then finally the gauntlet where a lot of the villains have escaped and you gotta fight through them all, ending with a rematch with the Joker. The game is certainly difficult, but it's not at all impossible. While I would like a few extra checkpoints here and there, you never go too far without one. Also, while the game is titled The Adventures of Batman and Robin, Robin is only in it in a few segments and scenes. This is a single player only game too, but honestly this game is really great. Even though the Riddler stage does drag on a bit, man is this a good game. You can tell there was so much passion here. They really tried to make this game a truly good and accurate adaptation of the show, and it's absolutely worth a go. And outside of a mobile VR experience where you sit around and watch people talk, or the PC Activity Center game where you do little tasks and puzzles with Robin, that's it. That's every game I could find based off Batman the Animated Series and the New Adventures series or the last season. It's been an interesting journey for sure, with a lot of ups and downs, but I hope you found something you liked or thought was interesting. I highly recommend the Genesis title, and the Game Boy and Game Boy Color ones are both worth a look, with a Super Nintendo game being my absolute favorite. I just can't get over how good this game looks and sounds. Thanks for watching. As a longtime fan of the show, this has been a really fun project. It was really crushing to hear about Kevin Conroy's passing, but he's left a hell of a legacy. Batman is not going anywhere anytime soon, and his impact will continue to be felt for a long time. To me, this is the Batman.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.